I used to believe that the walls of a home were meant to keep the world out, but I've learned that they are just as effective at keeping a nightmare in. Watching Jillian walk down the aisle in her pale lavender bridesmaid silk 20 years ago, I thought we were weaving our lives together in a bond of sisterhood. I never imagined that the same fabric would eventually be tangled in my own bedsheets. The betrayal isn't just the presence of her in my sanctuary. It's the way my husband, Harrison, looks at me with pity instead of guilt, as if my heartbreak is merely a social inconvenience he needs to manage. I need to know what happened. Please subscribe, like, and comment to stay with me through this. How do you survive when the two people who know your soul best decide to rewrite your reality while you're still standing in the room? The smell was the first thing that betrayed the order of my life. It was a scent of expensive bergamot and something metallic, Jillian's signature perfume. It didn't belong in the master suite. It belonged in the foyer, or perhaps the kitchen during our Tuesday coffee. But here, it was an intruder. I had come home early from the library because the humidity had triggered a migraine, the kind that makes the light feel like a physical weight against the eyes. I walked up the stairs, my hand trailing on the mahogany banister Harrison had polished just the weekend before. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the central air. I pushed open the bedroom door, expecting the cool, dim sanctuary of my unmade bed. Instead, I found them. It wasn't a cinematic moment of screaming and tangled limbs. It was worse. It was domestic. Jillian was sitting on the edge of the mattress, wearing her silk slip. Her hair, the same shade of honey it had been when we were 10, spilled over her shoulders. Harrison was standing by the window, his back to her, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked like he was preparing for a board meeting, not stepping out of a betrayal. "Evelyn," Harrison said. His voice didn't waver. There was no jump of the heart, no widening of the pupils. He simply turned, his face a mask of engineered calm. "You're home early?" Jillian didn't look at me. She looked at her fingernails, buffed to a soft pink. "I told him you'd be home around 4, Harrison," she whispered. Her voice carried that familiar, flighty quality I had spent decades trying to ground. I couldn't speak. The air felt thick, like I was trying to breathe through wool. My gaze drifted to the nightstand. There sat my wedding photograph, the one where Jillian is standing just to my left, holding my bouquet of white roses, her smile perfectly practiced. The lavender silk of her bridesmaid dress in that photo seemed to bleed into the reality of the room. "What is this?" I finally managed. My voice sounded small, a stranger's voice. Harrison stepped toward me, not with an apology, but with the measured gait of a man approaching a structural flaw. "Don't do this, Evelyn. Don't make this into something theatrical. We've discussed the distance between us for years. You've retreated into your books and your silences. Jillian has simply been present." "Present?" I repeated, the word tasting like copper. "She's in our bed, Harrison. She's my best friend." "You pushed her toward me," he said, and the conviction in his tone was terrifying. He believed it. "Every time you shut down, every time you chose your quiet over our life, you created a vacuum. Jillian just filled the space you left empty. It's a natural progression. If you're looking for someone to blame, look at the way you've neglected the foundation of this marriage." The psychological weight of his words hit me harder than the sight of them together. He was doing what he always did, re-engineering the narrative so that the collapse was my fault. I looked at Jillian, waiting for the girl who used to share her secrets with me under the covers of our sleeping bags. "Jillian?" I asked, my voice cracking. She finally looked up. There was no pity in her eyes, only a dull, simmering resentment that must have been aging for years. "You always had everything so figured out, Evie. The perfect house, the perfect husband, the perfect son. You didn't even notice when you stopped wanting them. You were just hoarding them. I turned to leave, my instinct for order demanding I get away from the smell of her perfume. But Harrison was faster. He didn't grab me, but he moved with a sudden, sharp authority, reaching for the bedroom door. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm leaving, Harrison. I'm going to my mother's. I'm going anywhere." "No," he said. He closed the door, and I heard the distinct, heavy click of the deadbolt, the one he'd installed himself when we moved in, citing security. "You're not going anywhere in this state. You'll go out there, you'll call your sisters, you'll make a scene. You'll embarrass us. You'll embarrass Jillian." "Embarrass her?" I gasped. "She's the one who—" "I won't have the Thorn name dragged through the mud because you've decided to have a Victorian fainting spell," Harrison interrupted. He stepped back, pocketing the key. "You'll stay here until you've regained your composure. We will handle this like adults, behind closed doors. I've already moved your things into the guest wing. You'll stay there tonight." "You're locking me in?" "I'm preserving our dignity," he corrected. He looked at Jillian. "Go get dressed, Jillian. I'll make us some tea. Evelyn needs a moment to reflect on her role in this." He walked out, and Jillian followed him, her silk slip whispering against the floorboards. As she passed me, she didn't flinch. She didn't even look away. She walked out of my bedroom like she was the one who belonged there, and I was the guest who had overstayed her welcome. I stood in the center of the room, the bergamot scent cloying and heavy. I walked to the door and pulled the handle. It didn't budge. The mahogany grain felt cold under my hand. My husband had spent his career building bridges, but he had just turned my own home into a cage. I sat on the edge of the bed, the side Jillian hadn't touched, and looked at the rumpled sheets. 20 years of laundry, of choosing the right thread count, of smoothing out the wrinkles. I realized then that I hadn't been building a fortress at all. I had been decorating my own prison, and I had invited the jailer in to be my bridesmaid. The silence of the house settled in, heavy and expectant. Why hadn't I noticed the scent of bergamot weeks ago? The guest room smelled of cedar and neglect. It was a space designed for people we didn't particularly want to stay long. A stiff mattress, a single dresser with a sticking bottom drawer, and a window that looked out over the HVAC unit. Harrison had escorted me here with the same clinical detachment he used to supervise a bridge inspection. He hadn't touched me, but his presence was a physical wall, guiding me into the smaller life he had designed for me. I spent the first few hours sitting on the edge of the twin bed, listening to the house. When you are a librarian, you learn the different textures of silence. There is the silence of study, which is vibrant and full of intent. There is the silence of an empty room, which is hollow. But the silence coming from the other side of the guest wing door was heavy, a suffocating, constructed quiet. Below me, I could hear the muffled clink of porcelain. They were having dinner. My dinner. I had spent Sunday afternoons slow roasting a chicken with rosemary and lemon, a recipe Jillian had given me years ago when I was recovering from the flu. Now, she was likely carving it. Around 9 o'clock, the deadbolt turned. It was a sharp, metallic snap that made my stomach coil. Harrison walked in carrying a tray. On it was a single plate of the chicken, now cold, and a glass of water. No napkin, no silverware. "You need to eat," he said. He set the tray on the dusty nightstand. He didn't look at the room, only at me. He was wearing his reading glasses, perched on the bridge of his nose, a sign that he was in work mode. "Harrison, let me out," I said. My voice was raspy. "You can't keep me here. This is kidnapping. This is insane." "Don't use such inflammatory language, Evelyn. It's beneath your intelligence," he replied, his tone weary. He pulled the small wooden chair from the desk and sat, crossing his legs. I'm not keeping you here. I'm giving you a sanctuary to process your emotional instability. You've always been prone to withdrawal when faced with reality. I'm simply formalizing that withdrawal so we can maintain the household's structural integrity. Structural integrity? I laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. You're sleeping with my best friend in our bed. Jillian is staying in the master suite because she is assisting me with the transition, Harrison said, as if he were explaining a detour on a highway. Leo will be home from college for the long weekend in 3 days. By then, I expect you to have reached a state of acceptance. I've already spoken to him on the phone. My heart stopped. What did you tell him? The truth, through a lens he can handle, Harrison said. That your depression has taken a turn for the worse, that you've become erratic and need a period of isolation to recover. He was disappointed, of course, but he understands. He knows how difficult you can be when you shut down. The psychological precision of his strike was masterful. He had taken my greatest insecurity, the fear that my quiet nature was actually a burden to my son, and turned it into a cage. He wasn't just locking a door, he was locking Leo's heart against me. You're a monster, I whispered. I'm a man who solves problems, Evelyn, he said, standing up. He picked up a chipped mug from the dresser, an old souvenir from a library conference I'd attended a decade ago. He turned it over in his hand, then set it back down with a sharp clack. Eat your dinner. I'll be back in the morning to discuss the grocery list. Jillian thinks we need to refresh the pantry. She says your choices have become stagnant. He walked out, and the lock clicked back into place. I didn't eat the chicken. I stared at the rosemary sprig, now wilted and dark. The room felt smaller. Harrison had always managed our finances, our schedules, even the maintenance of my car. I realized with a sickening jolt that my dependency on him wasn't an accident. It was a design choice. I must have drifted into a fitful sleep because I woke to the sound of something dragging across the floorboards in the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door. The blue rug in the study has to go, Harrison. Jillian's voice drifted through the wood. She sounded energized, her designer voice in full swing. It holds too much of that old, dusty energy. Evelyn always insisted on it because of some sentimental nonsense about her grandmother, but it clashes with the new light we're bringing in. Do whatever you think is best, Jill, Harrison replied. His voice was warmer than it ever was with me, low, indulgent. I want the space to feel like yours. It already does, she giggled. I'm thinking of repainting the bedroom, a soft bergamot, something fresh. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door. Bergamot, the scent that was currently clinging to my own pillowcases. Jillian wasn't just sleeping with my husband, she was refreshing me out of existence. She knew every sentimental attachment I had. I had told her about my grandmother's rug over glasses of wine while we cried about our mothers. I had shared my vulnerabilities like they were sacred, and she was using them as a punch list for my erasure. I reached into my pocket, hoping, praying I had my phone. But of course, Harrison had taken my purse from the foyer. I was a librarian with no books, a wife with no husband, and a mother whose son thought she was losing her mind. I looked around the guest room, desperate for a tool, a weapon, anything. My eyes landed on the single-framed photograph on the wall. It was a generic print of a lighthouse, the kind of mass-produced art meant to be ignored. I stood up and took it down. Behind the frame, tucked into the backing, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a note in Leo's childish handwriting from years ago, when he used to play explorer in the house. Secret base found. Don't tell Dad. He had hidden it there when he was 7. I held the paper, the ink faded, and felt a sudden, sharp clarity. Harrison believed he had braced every corner of this house, but he had forgotten that a home isn't just a structure of wood and nails. It's a repository of secrets. I went to the window and tried to lift the sash. It was painted shut, another one of Harrison's winterization projects. But as I leaned my forehead against the cold glass, I saw something in the driveway that didn't make sense. Jillian's car was packed, not with suitcases, but with boxes from our attic, boxes labeled Evelyn, childhood. Where were they planning to take the pieces of me they were removing? The morning light in the guest room was unfiltered and cruel. Harrison had never bothered to install the blackout curtains here that we had in the master suite. He said the guest room didn't require luxury investments. I woke up with my neck stiff and my mouth tasting of copper and thirst. At precisely 8 o'clock, the deadbolt turned. It was a sound I was beginning to associate with the heavy thud of a gavel. Harrison entered, looking refreshed in a crisp white shirt and the navy silk tie I had given him for his last birthday. He carried a plastic bowl of oatmeal and a stack of papers. "Good morning, Evelyn," he said. He didn't ask how I slept. He placed the bowl on the nightstand next to the cold, congealed chicken from the night before. "I've drafted a schedule for the next 48 hours. To ensure Leo's arrival goes smoothly, we need to establish a routine that minimizes friction." I didn't look at the oatmeal. "Harrison, where are my things? I saw Jillian putting boxes from the attic into her car." Harrison didn't blink. He sat at the small desk, clicking his ballpoint pen. "Jillian is helping me consolidate the clutter. You've always had a hoarding instinct when it comes to the past, Evelyn. It makes the house feel heavy. We're moving your personal archives to a climate-controlled storage unit. It's better for the preservation of the paper, and it allows the house to breathe." "You're moving my life out while I'm locked in a room?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm optimizing our environment," he corrected. He handed me a sheet of paper. "This is a list of talking points for when Leo arrives. You will stay in this wing. If he asks to see you, I will tell him you are resting. If you happen to encounter him, you will stick to the narrative. You are overwhelmed, you are grateful for Jillian's help, and you are taking time to find yourself. Do you understand?" "You're asking me to lie to our son about your infidelity." "I'm asking you to protect him from the mess you've made of your mental health," Harrison said. He stood up and looked around the room, his eyes landing on the lighthouse print I had taken down. He didn't ask why it was on the floor. He simply picked it up and hung it back on its hook with mathematical precision. "Eat. You're looking sallow. It's not a good look for a woman of your age." He left, and the click of the lock felt like a physical blow to my chest. A few minutes later, the sounds of the house resumed. It was the Jillian and Harrison show. I heard the front door open, the sound of laughter, that light, tinkling sound Jillian used when she was being charming, and then the heavy scraping of furniture. "Not there, Harrison," Jillian called out. Her voice was bright, possessive. "The armchair needs to face the window. Evelyn always had it tucked in the corner, like she was hiding. We want this room to feel open, like there are no secrets." The irony was a jagged blade. I stood by the door, pressing my ear to the wood, a small humiliation burning in my gut. I realized I didn't even have a toothbrush. Harrison had moved me here with nothing but the clothes on my back. I felt oily, my skin crawling with the lack of basic hygiene. It was a calculated move to make me feel small, to make me feel like the erratic woman he claimed I was. I sat back on the bed and closed my eyes, a memory surfacing from 3 years ago. We had been at a dinner party for one of Harrison's firm's partners. Jillian was there, as she always was. I remember mentioning that I wanted to renovate the library at work. Harrison had cut me off mid-sentence, patting my hand with a patronizing smile. "Evelyn is our little dreamer," he had told the table. "She lives in the 19th century. If it were up to her, we'd still be using candles and silence." Jillian had laughed then, a sharp, knowing sound. "Some people just aren't built for the modern world, Harrison. They find the light too bright." At the time, I thought it was just a joke, a bit of gentle ribbing between friends. Now I saw the architectural plans they had been drawing up for years. They hadn't just fallen into bed. They had been excavating the ground beneath me, waiting for the moment I finally lost my footing. The afternoon dragged on. The heat in the room rose as the sun hit the HVAC unit outside. The smell of cedar from the closet became cloying, mixing with the scent of the congealing oatmeal. I felt a sense of profound invisibility. I was a community librarian, a woman whose entire life was dedicated to making sure things were in their proper place, and I had been filed away in the miscellaneous drawer of my own home. Around 3 o'clock, I heard the guest wing door open. Not the bedroom door, but the door to the hallway that separated my cell from the rest of the house. "Evie, are you awake?" It was Jillian. Her voice was hushed, performatively sympathetic. I didn't answer. I heard her footsteps stop outside my door. "I brought you some of your tea," she whispered through the wood. "The Earl Grey with the lavender. I know you're upset, but you have to see that this is for the best. Harrison was so lonely, Evie. You were always so far away, even when you were sitting right next to him." "Jillian, open the door," I said, my voice flat. "I can't," she sighed. "Harrison has the only key. He's worried you'll try to hurt yourself, or me. He's just protecting us. But I wanted you to know, I'm taking really good care of the house. I've even started cataloging your books. You had so many duplicates. I'm donating the extras to the hospital." The books. My duplicates were my first editions, the ones I had spent years tracking down. She was stripping my shelves like a looter. "You're a thief, Jillian," I said. "You've always been a thief. You stole my mother's attention when we were kids, you stole my secrets, and now you're stealing my bed." "I didn't steal him, Evelyn," she snapped, the mask of sympathy slipping for a second. "I was chosen. There's a difference. Harrison needs a partner, not a roommate who smells like old paper." I heard her walk away, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. As the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows across the room, I noticed something I had missed before. On the stack of papers Harrison had left, underneath the talking points, was a legal document. It was a power of attorney form. It wasn't signed yet, but my name was typed at the bottom, right next to a small X marked in pencil. Harrison wasn't just waiting for Leo to arrive. He was waiting for me to break. He didn't just want Jillian in his bed. He wanted my signature on a document that would give him total control over the Thorne estate and my life. The curiosity that kept me upright was no longer about why they did it. It was about what was in the boxes in the car. If Jillian was consolidating the attic, why was she taking the box labeled estate papers to her own car instead of the storage unit? By the second morning, my skin felt like a layer of parchment that had been left too close to a heat vent. The lack of a toothbrush was no longer a minor inconvenience. It was a degradation that felt designed to erode my sense of self. Harrison knew me. He knew that my morning ritual, the precise brushing, the cold water on the face, the organizing of the vanity, was the scaffold upon which I built my day. Without it, I was beginning to feel as unanchored as the dusty motes dancing in the guest room's window light. The lock turned at 7:15. This time, Harrison didn't bring oatmeal. He brought a small blue plastic basin of lukewarm water and a single thin washcloth. "I realized you might be feeling unkempt," he said, setting the basin on the dresser. He stood back, his hands clasped behind his steady, straight back. "Jillian suggested a full toiletries kit, but I told her it was better to keep things simple. We don't want you getting distracted by the vanity of your previous life." "I need my medicine, Harrison," I said, my voice sounding thick and unfamiliar. "My thyroid pills. You know I can't skip those." "They're being managed," he replied. He reached into his pocket and produced a single white pill, placing it on the edge of the dresser next to the basin. "I'll bring the evening dose at 6, along with the power of attorney form. I expect it to be signed by then, Evelyn. If you want to see Leo when he pulls into the driveway tomorrow, you need to show me that you're willing to cooperate with the new infrastructure of this family." I looked at the pill. "You're using our son as a bargaining chip for my legal rights?" "I'm using incentives to ensure a peaceful transition," he countered. He walked over to the window, his eyes scanning the driveway with the practiced gaze of a man checking a construction site for safety hazards. "Jillian is finishing up with the boxes. She's remarkably efficient. She found your father's old ledger from the estate sale 20 years ago. I didn't even know you still had it." My breath hitched. The ledger wasn't just paper. It was the only proof I had of the loan my father had given us to start Harrison's engineering firm. Harrison had always insisted it was a gift, a blessing with no strings. But the ledger contained the repayment schedule, a schedule Harrison had stopped following 3 years ago. "Why does she have that, Harrison? That's my private property." "It was in the attic, in a box of clutter," Harrison said, his voice dropping into that chillingly calm register. "And since I am the head of this household, nothing under this roof is truly private if it affects the structural integrity of our finances. You've been holding that over me like a weapon for 2 decades, Evelyn." Jillian recognized it for what it was, a weight that needed to be removed. He left before I could scream at him. The click of the door was louder this time, or perhaps it was just the ringing in my ears. I moved to the washcloth, dipping it into the water. It was barely damp. I wiped my face, feeling the grit of 24 hours of confinement. I felt invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of my own marriage. Harrison didn't view me as a person anymore. I was a structural flaw. In his engineering mind, when a beam is compromised, you don't mourn it. You brace the building and replace the wood. Through the window, I watched the driveway. Jillian was out there, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and a sundress that looked suspiciously like the one I had bought for our anniversary trip to Maine, the trip Harrison had canceled at the last minute for a project emergency. She was leaning against her car, smoking a cigarette, a habit she always hid from me because she knew I hated the smell. She looked up at my window. She didn't wave. She didn't smirk. She simply tilted her head, exhaling a long plume of gray smoke that drifted toward the HVAC unit. She looked at me with the same clinical interest a gardener might give a stubborn weed. Then, she opened her trunk and pulled out the box labeled estate papers. She didn't put it in the back seat. She sat on the bumper and began to leaf through it. I watched her hands move. She was looking for something specific. Jillian Vance had spent 44 years being the unfortunate friend, the one who lived in rentals and drove secondhand cars while I had the Thorne estate. Her interior design business was a front for her true talent, finding the vulnerabilities in other people's homes and making herself a necessary addition. A psychological realization bloomed in my mind, cold and sharp. Harrison didn't love Jillian, not in the way people think of love. He loved the efficiency she offered. Jillian was willing to do the dirty work, The attic purging, the ledger hiding, the social engineering of Leo's mind that I had always resisted. I had been the conscience of this house, and Harrison had finally decided that a conscience was too expensive to maintain. An hour later, the sounds of the house changed. The vacuum started. It was an aggressive, rhythmic sound, banging against the baseboards of the guest wing. Thump, thump, thump. "It's so much cleaner now, Harrison." Jillian's voice was muffled by the door, but the triumph in it was clear. "I can finally see the floor in the hallway. I don't know how she lived in all that dust." "You're doing a great job, Jill," Harrison replied. I could hear them standing right outside my door. "Did you find the key to the wall safe in the library?" "I'm still looking," she said. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "She probably has it hidden in one of those ridiculous poetry books. Don't worry, I'll find it. I'm going through the S section next." My heart hammered. The safe didn't hold jewelry. It held the original deed to the house that my father had bought in my name alone before I married Harrison. Harrison didn't just want a power of attorney. He wanted the house. And he had Jillian, the woman who knew exactly where I hid my treasures, acting as his private investigator. I looked at the blue washcloth, now cold in the basin. I looked at the single white pill. If Harrison got the deed, I wouldn't just be a guest in this wing. I would be homeless. I turned back to the window, my mind racing. I needed to reach Leo. He was a thorn, yes, and he looked like his father. But he had my eyes that noticed when things were out of place. I watched Jillian finish her cigarette. She tossed the butt onto the gravel and reached back into her trunk. She pulled out a small velvet-lined box, my jewelry box. She opened it, and even from the second floor, I could see the sparkle of the Thorne family emeralds, the ones Harrison's grandmother had left to me specifically. Jillian took the necklace out and held it against her throat, checking her reflection in the car's side mirror. She smiled. It wasn't the smile of a friend. It was the smile of a woman who had finally moved from the bridesmaid's line to the head of the table. But then she did something strange. She didn't put the necklace back. She tucked it into the pocket of her sundress and looked toward the front door, her posture suddenly stiff and anxious. She was hiding things from Harrison, too. The thyroid fatigue began to set in around noon, a heavy velvet curtain pulling across my mind. When you miss your dosage, the world doesn't just slow down. It blurs. My heart felt like it was beating through water. I sat on the floor by the window, the only place where the air felt even remotely thin enough to breathe. At 1 o'clock, the tray didn't come. Instead, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of the grandfather clock in the foyer, a clock that was supposed to be wound every Monday. Harrison had forgotten. Or perhaps Jillian thought the ticking was too aggressive for the new aesthetic of the Thorne estate. The guest wing door opened, but it wasn't the measured, heavy tread of my husband. It was the light, erratic click of Jillian's mules. She didn't unlock my bedroom door, but she stopped right outside it. I heard the rustle of a paper bag. "Harrison is at the firm for a few hours, Evie," she said. Her voice was different without him there, sharper, stripped of that breathless, helpful quality. "I brought you a sandwich. Turkey and sprouts. I know you hate sprouts, but they're good for your circulation. You're looking so puffy." I didn't move from the floor. "I saw you take the emeralds, Jillian. I saw you put them in your pocket." The silence on the other side of the door was absolute. Even the HVAC unit outside seemed to hum lower. "You're hallucinating, Evelyn," she finally said, her voice tight. "That's the thyroid talking. Harrison told me you'd start getting paranoid. It's a classic symptom of your decline." Harrison thinks you're helping him optimize the house, I whispered, pressing my forehead against the cool wood. He thinks you're his loyal soldier. But you're just a looter, aren't you? You're taking what you can before the walls come down. The walls aren't coming down for me, she hissed, her face clearly pressed against the other side of the door. I'm the one holding them up. Do you have any idea how much work it is to manage a man like Harrison? To pretend to be fascinated by bridge tensile strength for 4 hours a night? You had it easy. You just hid in your library and let him provide. I'm earning this house, stitch by stitch. It's my house, Jillian. My father bought it. The deed is in my name. Not for long, she said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. Harrison is in the library right now. Well, he was before he left. He's very close to finding that safe. He's convinced you have a copy of the deed in there with a forged signature from years ago. He thinks you were planning to divorce him and take everything. I'm just helping him find the proof he needs to protect himself. The manipulation was breathtaking. She was feeding his paranoia, turning my father's gift into a perceived betrayal. Harrison was a man who lived in a world of loads and supports. If you convinced him a pillar was rotten, he wouldn't hesitate to tear it out. Leo will be here tomorrow, I said, my voice cracking. He won't believe you. Leo is 19, Evelyn. He wants his tuition paid and his car insured. Harrison has promised him the summer in Europe if he supports the family during this difficult transition. He's already started calling me Auntie G again. It's amazing how quickly children adapt when their comfort is at stake. She dropped the paper bag. It hit the floor with a soft, greasy sound. I heard her walk away, humming a tune I recognized, the processional from my wedding. I reached out and pulled the sandwich under the door. I didn't eat it. I opened the bread and looked at the sprouts. Tucked inside the green mess was a small, crumpled receipt. It was a pawn shop ticket from 3 towns over. Item: gold signet ring. Client: G. Vance. My father's signet ring. She hadn't just cleared the attic, she was liquidating the smaller pieces of my history for quick cash. Harrison wouldn't notice a ring missing from a box of clutter, but he would certainly notice the emeralds. A psychological insight flickered through my brain fog. Jillian wasn't planning a life with Harrison. She was planning an exit strategy. She was a parasite who had realized the host was about to be destroyed by the very structural changes she had encouraged. She was stashing her loot in her car, preparing to vanish the moment Harrison's engineering of my life reached its inevitable legal collapse. I spent the afternoon watching the shadows grow long. I felt the neglect physically, the dry throat, the skin that felt like it was shrinking, the dull ache in my joints. Harrison was managing my intake of medicine and food to make me more compliant for the POA signing. He wanted me weak enough to sign, but not so weak that the signature looked coerced. Around 5 o'clock, Harrison returned. I heard the heavy thud of the front door, the silence that followed, and then the sound of raised voices in the library. "I told you it was in the poetry section, Harrison," Jillian shouted. "I've moved every volume of Keats and Yeats, Jillian. There is no safe behind the shelves." "Then she moved it. She's cleverer than you think, Harrison. She's been playing the quiet librarian for 20 years while she built a fortress of her own." I closed my eyes. The safe wasn't in the library. It never had been. It was in the guest room, hidden behind the generic lighthouse print Harrison found so unremarkable. My father had installed it there specifically because he knew Harrison would never spend more than 5 minutes in a room designed for low-value guests. I looked at the lighthouse print. The key was taped to the back of the note Leo had written when he was 7. I was sitting on the only thing that could save me, and the only thing keeping me from it was a mahogany door and a husband who thought he had braced every corner. But then, I heard a new sound. a car door slamming in the driveway. A familiar, heavy bass beat vibrating from a car's speakers. Leo was early. "Dad?" I heard his voice from the foyer, echoing up the stairs. "Why's the door locked? And whose car is in the driveway with all my mom's boxes in it?" Harrison's footsteps thundered toward the stairs. "Leo, you're early! We weren't expecting you until—" "Where's Mom?" Leo's voice was sharp, the mimicry of his father's tone finally serving a purpose. "And why does it smell like Jillian's perfume in the hallway?" I stood up, pressing my hands against the door. I wanted to scream, to pound on the wood, but the thyroid fatigue hit me like a wave of lead. I could barely find my breath, let alone my voice. The sound of Leo's voice was like a frequency I hadn't heard in years, bright, youthful, and yet carrying that sharp, percussive edge he'd inherited from Harrison. It cut through the hazy, gray fog of my thyroid exhaustion. I slumped against the door, my cheek pressed to the cold mahogany. My throat felt like it was lined with dry sand. I tried to call out his name, but all that emerged was a thin, wheezing rasp. "Leo, son, you're nearly 24 hours ahead of schedule." Harrison's voice boomed from the foyer. It was his public voice, expansive, warm, and utterly hollow. "I was just about to head to the office to finish some paperwork so we could have a clear weekend." "The door was deadbolted, Dad," Leo said. I heard the heavy thud of his duffel bag hitting the floorboards. "And you didn't answer my question. Why are Mom's childhood boxes in Jillian's trunk? Is she moving out?" There was a pause. I could imagine Harrison adjusting his cufflinks, calculating the structural load of the lie he was about to tell. "Your mother has had a very difficult week, Leo," Harrison said, his tone dropping into a manufactured, heavy-hearted whisper. "She's had another episode, more severe than the ones over the summer. She's become obsessed with the past, hoarding these boxes, refusing to let the house be cleaned. Jillian is helping me move the clutter to storage so the environment stays healthy for your mother's recovery. It's for her own good." "Recovery? Is she sick?" Leo's voice wavered. The mimicry of his father's strength flickered, revealing the boy underneath. "She's in the guest wing," Harrison said. "Sleeping. Dr. Aris suggested total rest. No visitors, not even you, until she's stabilized. It's heartbreaking, Leo, but we have to be the strong ones for her." "I just want to say hi," Leo insisted. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, quick, rhythmic, moving toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that made my visions swim. "Leo, wait!" Harrison commanded. It wasn't a request. It was a structural order. "You'll only agitate her. She's in a state where she doesn't even recognize the need for her own hygiene. It's not a sight you want to remember." The humiliation of that lie felt like a physical weight, pressing me down into the carpet. Harrison was painting a picture of a woman who had disintegrated, a woman whose dignity had dissolved, all to keep his son from turning a doorknob. "Leo, darling!" Jillian's voice joined the fray. I heard the rustle of her sundress as she likely stepped out of the library. "You look so tall! Come into the kitchen. I've made those lemon bars you love. Your father and I were just discussing how to handle the garden while your mother is away." "Away? Dad said she was in the guest wing," Leo said. He sounded confused, caught between two different blueprints of the same lie. "She's here for now," Jillian said smoothly, her voice like honey poured over a blade. "But we're looking at some lovely retreats, somewhere quiet, somewhere with people who can manage her silences better than we can." The Auntie G mask was on. She was already positioning herself as the new center of gravity, The woman who made lemon bars while the mother rotted in a cedar-scented room. I clawed at the door, my fingernails dragging against the wood. I managed to find enough air to make a sound, not a word, but a rhythmic pounding. Thump, thump, thump. The hallway went silent. "What was that?" Leo asked. "The HVAC," Harrison said instantly. "I told you, the structural vibrations in this wing are getting worse. It's why your mother can't sleep. It's part of what's making her so erratic. Come on, Leo. Kitchen. Now." I heard them retreat. The kitchen was at the far end of the house, a world away from the guest wing. The silence returned to my room, heavier than before. I looked at the lighthouse print on the wall. My vision was tunneling, a symptom of the skipped pills that I knew all too well. My body felt like it was shutting down, moving into a low-power mode. If I didn't get my medication, I wouldn't have the strength to fight Harrison when he returned with the power of attorney form at 6. I crawled across the floor, the carpet scratching my knees. I reached the dresser and grabbed the lighthouse print, pulling it down. It was heavier than it looked. I flipped it over. There, taped to the back with yellowing cellophane, was the note Leo had written. "Secret base found. Don't tell Dad." And tucked beneath the paper was a small silver skeleton key. I took the key, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped it. I looked at the wall where the print had been. There was a faint, rectangular seam in the floral wallpaper, a seam I had helped my father cut 20 years ago. I pressed my thumb against the center of the seam, and a small panel popped forward. Behind it sat the black iron safe. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, oiled hiss. The safe swung open, revealing a stack of documents tied with a faded blue ribbon. On top was the deed to the Thorne estate. Evelyn Vance Thorne, sole owner. Beneath it was a letter from my father, dated the day of my wedding. I had read it 1,000 times, but today, the words felt like an indictment. "Evelyn, Harrison is a man of bridges. He understands how to move things from one point to another, but he does not understand the ground. This house is your ground. Never let him build on it without your permission." I clutched the deed to my chest, the paper crisp and cool. I had the ground, but I was still in the cage. Through the floorboards, I heard the sound of the back patio door sliding open. Leo and Jillian were outside. "Is she really that bad, Auntie G?" Leo asked. They were standing right below my window. I could hear the clink of glasses. "She seemed fine when I called her 2 weeks ago." "It's a slow erosion, Leo," Jillian said. I could hear her lighting another cigarette. "She's been hiding it for a long time. Harrison has been carrying the whole weight of this family on his shoulders. He's exhausted. He just needs someone to help him brace the structure, someone who doesn't mind the light." "I guess," Leo said. He sounded small. "It just feels quiet without her." "It's a better kind of quiet, don't you think?" she asked. I looked at the deed in my hand. I looked at the blue plastic basin of water. A psychological realization hit me with the force of a landslide. Harrison wasn't just waiting for me to sign the POA. He was waiting for me to die. Spiritually, if not physically. He wanted the woman who remembered the loan, the woman who owned the ground, to be replaced by a medical file and a storage unit. And Jillian wasn't just his mistress. She was his architect of replacement. I reached for the thyroid pill Harrison had left on the dresser, the one he'd used as a taunt. I swallowed it without water, the bitterness coating my tongue. I needed to wait for it to hit my system. I needed 20 minutes of chemistry to give me 5 minutes of strength. But then, I heard the guest wing door open again. It wasn't Harrison. The lock on my bedroom door didn't turn, but I heard the distinct click of a camera shutter from the hallway. Someone was taking a photo of the door through the gaps in the wood. "Mom?" It was a whisper, so low I almost missed it. Leo was at the door, and he wasn't alone. I heard the faint metallic jingle of Jillian's keys, the ones she'd been carrying in her sundress pocket. "Leo, stop!" Jillian's voice hissed from the hallway. "Your father will be back any minute. If he sees us here—" "You said she was too far gone to recognize anyone," Leo said. His voice was cold now, echoing the exact tone Harrison used when he found a flaw in a blueprint. "But if she's sleeping, why is there a tray of cold chicken sitting in the hallway by the trash?" The silence following Leo's question about the chicken tray was so brittle, I feared even a breath would shatter it. In the hallway, the air felt thick with Jillian's frantic, silent calculations. I stood on the other side of the door, clutching the deed to my chest, my legs trembling from the chemical surge of the thyroid pill. It was a small, bitter victory, a single dose in a sea of neglect, but it gave me just enough strength to press my lips to the doorframe. "Leo," I whispered. It wasn't a shout. It was a dry, papery sound, like leaves skittering across a grave. "Leo, I'm here." "Mom?" Leo's voice was right there, separated from me by 2 inches of mahogany and 20 years of Harrison's protection. I heard the door handle jiggle. The deadbolt held firm. "Dad, the door is locked. Why is the door locked?" "Leo, please." Jillian's voice was a sharp, desperate hiss. "She's in a delicate state. She gets aggressive if she's startled. The lock is for her own safety. She was trying to wander out onto the roof last night." "The roof?" Leo sounded incredulous, but I could hear the seed of doubt being planted. Harrison had spent Leo's entire life teaching him that I was fragile, a beautiful, but structurally unsound part of their world. "Step away from the door, Leo." Harrison's voice didn't come from the stairs. It came from the end of the hallway. He had returned through the garage, silent as a shadow. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, the sound of a man who was used to calming a panicked crowd at a construction site. "Dad, Jillian said Mom was sleeping, but she's talking," Leo said. I could hear the desperation in his voice, the plea for a logical explanation. "And she doesn't sound like herself." "That's because she isn't herself, son," Harrison said. I heard him stop just outside the door. I could almost feel his heat through the wood. "The thyroid imbalance has moved into a neurological phase. It's called myxedema madness. It causes paranoia, hallucinations, and vocal strain. She thinks we're trying to hurt her. She thinks Jillian is an intruder." "She said Jillian was a thief," Leo countered. But the authority in Harrison's tone was already starting to win. Harrison wasn't just my husband. He was the man who understood how the world worked. If he said it was myxedema madness, then it was a fact. "A symptom of the paranoia," Harrison said. "Jillian, take the lemon bars and Leo down to the patio. I need to administer her evening sedative. This is the hardest part of the care, Leo." "It's why I didn't want you here yet. It's painful to see the person you love become a stranger." "I just want to see her face," Leo whispered. "No," Harrison said. The word was a final steel beam being dropped into place. Not until she's stabilized. If you see her like this, it will only embarrass her later. You know how much your mother prizes her dignity. Do you want her to wake up and realize you saw her in this unwashed, erratic state? The psychological insight hit me with a sickening thud. Harrison was using my own vanity, my own sense of order, to keep my son at bay. He knew that if he told Leo I was embarrassing, Leo would pull back out of a sense of misplaced respect. He was excluding me from my son's life by pretending to protect my image. I heard Leo's footsteps retreat. They were slower this time, heavy with the weight of a son who had just been told his mother was a tragic, decaying secret. The lock turned. Harrison walked in alone. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at the floor, seeing the congealed oatmeal, the blue basin of cold water, and the congealed chicken Jillian had delivered. Then, his eyes moved to the wall. He saw the empty space where the lighthouse print had been. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He simply closed the door and turned the deadbolt. He looked at the safe, now open and exposed, its black iron maw empty. "Where is the deed, Evelyn?" he asked. His voice was conversational, the tone he used when discussing a budget overrun. I sat on the bed, the blue ribbon of the documents tucked under my thigh, hidden by the duvet. "It's gone, Harrison. Just like the emeralds Jillian took. Just like the signet ring she pawned." Harrison took a step toward me. He looked tired, not the exhaustion of a grieving husband, but the irritation of a man whose project was being delayed by faulty materials. "Jillian is a magpie. I know this. She takes small things to satisfy a lifelong hunger. I can manage Jillian. But I cannot manage a house that doesn't belong to me." "It was never yours," I said. "I've spent 20 years bracing these walls," he said, gesturing to the room. "I've paid the taxes, I've fixed the roof, I've made this estate a thorn landmark. Your father's gift was an insult, Evelyn. A way to keep me under his thumb even from the grave. I'm simply correcting a historical error." He reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was precise, finding the bone and squeezing just enough to make my fingers go numb. "Give me the deed, and sign the power of attorney. If you do, I'll tell Leo you've had a miraculous recovery. You can have dinner with him tomorrow. You can even have your library back. We'll just tell everyone Jillian was here for a consultation. And if I don't?" "Then the transport arrives at 8 tonight," he said. He checked his watch. "The facility is in the northern part of the state. Very private. Very secure. They specialize in long-term cognitive decline. Leo will be told you had a stroke. He'll visit you once a month, and you'll be too sedated to tell him otherwise." The neglect was no longer passive. It was a structured, legal erasure. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was preparing to overwrite me. "I won't sign," I said. Harrison let go of my wrist. He looked at me with a strange, detached pity. "You've always been so stubborn about the truth, Evelyn. But the truth is whatever the person with the key says it is." He walked to the dresser and picked up the blue washcloth. He dipped it into the cold, gray water of the basin and began to methodically wipe the dust from the lighthouse print he'd picked up from the floor. "Leo thinks you're a ghost," Harrison said, his back to me. "Jillian thinks you're a nuisance. And I think you're a structural liability. It's time to settle the ground." He left, taking the silver key to the safe with him. He didn't find the deed. I had it hidden. But as the lock clicked, I realized he didn't need the physical paper yet. He just needed me to disappear. I looked through the window. The sun was dipping below the tree line, casting the driveway into deep purple shadows. Jillian was down there again, sitting on the porch swing with Leo. She was showing him something on her phone, leaning in close, her bergamot perfume likely clouding his judgment. Leo was laughing. The exclusion was almost complete. My son was sitting 10 feet below me, bonding with the woman who was wearing my jewelry, while my husband was preparing a legal transport folder in the library. But then, I saw something in the shadows of the driveway. A second car pulled in, a car Harrison hadn't authorized. It was a black sedan with a city government seal on the door. A woman stepped out. She was carrying a briefcase and a stack of overdue notices from the community library. My assistant, Clara. She wasn't there for a social visit. She was looking at the boxes in Jillian's car with a look of profound professional alarm. Clara is a woman of systems. At the community library, she is the one who monitors the delicate humidity levels in the rare books room and tracks the circulation of the special collections with the fervor of a forensic accountant. She doesn't like loose ends, and she certainly doesn't like it when a senior librarian goes silent for 48 hours during the annual audit. I watched through the glass, my fingers leaving smudges on the pane. Clara stood by the driver's side door of Jillian's car, her head tilted at that precise, inquisitive angle she used when a patron tried to return a book with a coffee stain. She was looking at the box labeled Evelyn, Childhood. Specifically, at the corner of a ledger protruding from the top. Harrison and Leo were walking toward her. Even from the second floor, I could see the shift in Harrison's posture. He went from grieving father to authoritative homeowner in a single stride. "May I help you?" Harrison's voice drifted up, clipped and cold. "I'm Clara Jenkins from the library," she said. Her voice was steady, unimpressed by the Thorne Estate's imposing facade. "I'm looking for Evelyn. She hasn't answered her personal phone and she missed the board meeting this morning. We have several items from the Heritage Collection that were checked out to her personal account for the audit, and they haven't been returned to the vault." Jillian stepped forward, her heels crunching on the gravel. "Evelyn is quite ill, Clara. I'm her sister-in-law, Jillian. We're in the process of organizing her affairs. If you leave a list of the items, I'm sure we can find them in the storage bins." Clara's gaze shifted to Jillian, then to the car. "Sister-in-law? Evelyn doesn't have a brother. She's an only child." The silence that followed was a physical thing. I felt a surge of pride for Clara, the woman of records, the woman who knew the genealogy of every local family better than they knew it themselves. "A figure of speech," Jillian said, her voice rising an octave. "We've been best friends since we were children. Now, if you'll excuse us—" "I can't excuse the Heritage Collection," Clara interrupted. She pointed toward the box in Jillian's trunk. "That ledger right there. The one with the green leather binding and the gold leaf on the spine. That's a 1924 municipal property ledger. It belongs to the city's restricted archives. It shouldn't be in a private vehicle." My heart leaped. Jillian, in her greed-blinded refreshing of the attic, had stolen library property I had brought home to catalog. She had stolen a government document. "This is my mother's estate record," Jillian snapped, her hand reaching out to slam the trunk shut. But Leo was faster. He stepped between Jillian and the car, his brow furrowed. "A municipal ledger? Mom said she was working on a project for the city. Dad, why is city property in Jillian's car?" Harrison stepped in, his voice like a steel door closing. "Clara, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. My wife's mental state has been erratic. She likely took things from the library without authorization. We will return everything once she's stabilized." Leo, go inside and help Jillian with the lemon bars. I'm not going inside, Leo said. He looked at Clara, then up at the house. His eyes scanned the windows, stopping on the guest wing. I didn't move. I wanted him to see me, but the glare on the glass was too strong. Clara, if my mom is as sick as they say, she shouldn't be left alone. Why can't she come down and talk to you? Leo, that's enough, Harrison barked. A psychological insight settled into the pit of my stomach. Harrison's greatest fear wasn't the law. It was the loss of narrative control. As long as the world believed I was the erratic one, his structural changes were seen as acts of mercy. But Clara represented an objective system, a system that didn't care about his civil engineer authority. Clara pulled out her tablet. I'll need to file a report with the city attorney. Removing restricted ledgers is a felony, Mr. Thorne. If Evelyn is unable to account for them, the city will have to conduct a site inspection. A site inspection won't be necessary, Harrison said, his voice dropping into a lethal, low register. I will bring the items to the library myself this evening. Now, please leave my property before I call the police and report you for trespassing. Clara didn't flinch. She looked at the city seal on her car door, then back at the house. I'll be at the library until 6, Mr. Thorne. After that, the matter is out of my hands. She got back into her car and backed down the driveway. I watched her go. The red of her taillights the only color in the fading gray of my world. Harrison didn't go into the house. He turned on Jillian. I couldn't hear the words, but his gestures were sharp, violent movements. He pointed at the boxes, then at the garage. Jillian was shrinking, her anti-G mask completely shattered. She began frantically pulling boxes out of her trunk, stacking them on the gravel like a looter caught in a searchlight. 10 minutes later, the lock on my door turned. Harrison walked in, but he wasn't carrying a tray or a document. He was carrying a roll of heavy-duty packing tape. "You've been busy, haven't you?" he asked. He walked to the window and pulled the heavy velvet drapes shut, plunging the room into a suffocating artificial twilight. "You invited that little clerk into our business." "She's my assistant, Harrison, and she's smarter than both of you." "She's a nuisance," Harrison said. He grabbed the lighthouse print from the dresser and smashed it against the corner of the mahogany bedpost. The glass shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He ripped the note and the key from the backing and shoved them into his pocket. "The safe is irrelevant now, Evelyn. The deed is irrelevant. If the city wants an inspection, they'll find a woman who is so profoundly unwell she can't even stand. They'll find a house in transition. And they'll find a husband who is heartbroken by his wife's criminal neglect of her professional duties." He walked toward me, the packing tape making a loud, screeching sound as he pulled a long strip. "The transport is coming at 7, he whispered, his face inches from mine. "I've moved the appointment up. Leo is being taken to dinner by Jillian. By the time they return, you'll be on the highway. And this wing will be empty." He didn't tie me up. He didn't need to. He simply began taping the vents in the room, sealing the cracks around the door, and finally, taping the phone jack in the corner. "I don't want any more vibrations disturbing your rest, Evelyn," he said. He left, and the sound of the deadbolt was followed by the screeching slide of a heavy piece of furniture being pushed against the door from the outside. I was sealed in. I sat in the dark, the thyroid fatigue pressing down on me like a physical weight. I had the deed tucked under my leg, a useless piece of paper in a room with no air. But as I felt my consciousness start to drift, I remembered the sandwich Jillian had left. I reached for the bag. I didn't want the food. I wanted the pawn shop ticket. If I could get that ticket to Leo, if I could show him that Auntie G was selling our history while his mother was sleeping, the engineering of Harrison's lie would finally reach its breaking point. But the only way out was the window, and the window was 2 stories up, overlooking a bed of thorns. The darkness in the guest room was no longer just the absence of light. It was a physical weight, thick with the smell of old cedar and the adhesive tang of the packing tape Harrison had used to seal the vents. Every breath felt like I was pulling through a filter of dust. My thyroid fatigue had moved past a simple ache into a profound, bone-deep hollow. I felt like a clock whose mainspring had been wound too tight and then snapped. I was ticking, but the hands weren't moving. I sat on the floor, my back against the twin bed, clutching the pawn shop ticket Jillian had accidentally left in the sandwich bag. It was a tiny scrap of yellow paper, but in this room, it was the only thing that felt real. It was proof that the woman currently taking my son to dinner was a common thief, a scavenger picking over the remains of a life she hadn't yet finished destroying. Through the heavy velvet drapes, I heard the crunch of gravel. I crawled to the window, moving my limbs like they belonged to someone else. I parted the curtains just enough to see the driveway. Harrison was standing by Jillian's car. He was leaning into the driver's side window, his hand resting on the roof in that possessive, authoritative way he had. Leo was in the passenger seat, his face shadowed, staring straight ahead. Jillian was behind the wheel, her wide-brimmed hat casting her features into a sharp, elegant silhouette. "Don't be late, Jillian," Harrison said. His voice was muffled by the glass, but I knew the cadence. "And make sure he keeps his phone off. We don't want any distractions while his mother is resting." "We'll be at the bistro, Harrison," Jillian replied. She reached out and patted Leo's hand, the same hand I used to hold when he was a toddler afraid of the dark. "It'll be a lovely, quiet evening, just what he needs." They backed out of the driveway. The red glow of the taillights lingered on the brickwork for a second before vanishing into the dusk. I was alone with Harrison. The silence of the house settled back in, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of an engineer waiting for a stress test to conclude. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, slow, rhythmic, moving toward the library. Then, the sound of the safe being dragged across the floor. He was still looking for the deed. He was convinced it was somewhere in the library, hidden in the geography of my professional life. A psychological realization hit me as I slumped against the windowsill. Harrison's greatest weakness was his belief that everyone acted according to a predictable, structural logic. He assumed I would hide the deed in the library because I was a librarian. He didn't understand that a home isn't a building. It's a series of emotional layers. He had braced the walls, but he had ignored the foundation. I looked at the pawn ticket. I needed to get this to Leo. If he saw that Jillian had pawned my father's signet ring, the ring he was supposed to inherit on his 21st birthday, the Auntie G facade would collapse. Leo valued heritage even more than I did. But I was sealed in. I looked at the window. It was painted shut, but the sash was old. My father had mentioned once that the wood in this wing was breathing, expanding and contracting with the humidity. I reached up and tried to pull the lock. It didn't budge. My fingers were too weak, the thyroid tremors making them slip against the cold brass. I looked around the room for a tool. The lighthouse print was shattered on the floor, the glass glinting like ice. I picked up a large shard, wrapping the base in the blue washcloth to protect my hand. I began to scrape at the paint around the window frame. Each movement was an agonizing effort, my heart pounding a frantic, uneven rhythm. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound seemed loud enough to wake the neighbors. but the HVAC unit outside hummed its indifferent mechanical song, masking my desperation. After what felt like hours, the paint began to flake away in long gray strips. I wedged the shard of glass into the seam and leaned my weight against it. The wood groaned, a low, protesting sound that mirrored the ache in my own joints. Suddenly, the front door chimes rang. I froze, the glass shard still wedged in the frame. It was only 6:30. Leo and Jillian wouldn't be back for another hour. I heard Harrison's footsteps thunder toward the foyer. The door opened. "You're early," Harrison said. His voice was different now, no longer the grieving husband, but a client speaking to a contractor. "We had a cancellation in the city," a stranger's voice replied. It was deep, professional, and chillingly polite. "The vehicle is idling at the curb. Is the patient ready for transport?" "She's in the guest wing," Harrison said. "She's sedated, but she can be difficult. I've prepared the paperwork. The power of attorney is signed." My blood went cold. He had forged my signature. He hadn't even waited for the evening dose. He had simply overwritten me on the page, just as he was overwriting me in the house. "We'll need to clear the hallway," the stranger said. "The gurney has a wide turning radius." "I've moved the furniture," Harrison replied. I heard the sound of the heavy mahogany wardrobe being pushed back away from my door. The screech of the wood against the floor sounded like a scream. I had minutes. I threw my entire weight against the window sash. It didn't open, but the glass shard snapped, the tip of it flying off and disappearing into the thorn bushes below. I looked at the pawn ticket in my hand. I didn't have time to get the window open. I grabbed a roll of tape from the dresser, the one Harrison had left behind in his arrogance. I taped the pawn ticket to the outside of the window pane, pressing it hard against the glass. It was small, but if Leo looked up, if he looked at the window where his mother was supposed to be sleeping, he might see the yellow flash against the dark glass. Then, I took the deed. I didn't hide it under the bed or in the closet. I walked to the HVAC vent Harrison had taped shut. I peeled back a corner of the tape and slid the blue ribbon documents deep into the metal ductwork. If they took me, they would take me. But they wouldn't take the ground. The deadbolt on my door turned. The door swung open, and the hall light flooded into the room, blinding me. Harrison stood there, flanked by two men in white uniforms. They were carrying a folded gurney, the metal glinting in the artificial light. "Evelyn," Harrison said. He looked at me, lying on the floor by the window, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was the look an engineer gives a bridge that has finally, inevitably, collapsed. "The transport is here. It's time to go to the retreat. You'll be much more comfortable there." "I'm not going anywhere, Harrison," I said, though my voice was a mere ghost. "The paperwork says otherwise," he said, holding up a blue folder. "And the paperwork is the only thing that matters now." One of the men in white stepped forward, reaching for his belt. He pulled out a small, pre-filled syringe. "This will help with the transition, Mrs. Thorne," he said. I backed into the corner, my hand brushing against the cold glass of the window. I looked out one last time. A car was turning into the driveway. It wasn't Jillian's. It was a police cruiser, its lights off, moving slowly. And behind it was Clara's black sedan. Clara hadn't gone home at 6. Harrison saw the lights reflecting in the hallway mirror. He went still, his hand gripping the blue folder so hard the cardboard buckled. "Who is that?" he whispered. "The audit isn't over, Harrison," I said, a sudden, sharp clarity returning to my voice. But as the police car stopped, I saw Jillian's car pull in right behind it. She had Leo, and she was crying. Not the helpful tears of a friend, but the frantic, ugly sobs of a woman who had just realized the structural load was too much for her to carry. The men in white moved with a practiced, terrifying efficiency. One grabbed my shoulder, while the other prepared the sedative. Harrison stood by the door, his silhouette framed by the hallway light, looking like a curator satisfied with the final placement of a difficult exhibit. "Don't fight it, Evelyn," Harrison said, his voice a low, mechanical hum. "Resistance only confirms the diagnosis." But as the needle moved toward my arm, the house erupted. A scream, not of pain, but of sheer, unadulterated fury, tore through the foyer below. It was Leo. "Dad, get down here right now!" Harrison's composure didn't crack, but it stiffened. He signaled the men to wait. "Handle her," he whispered, before turning to head toward the stairs. The man with the syringe paused. In that second of hesitation, the bedroom window shattered. It wasn't a stone. It was a heavy, professional-grade flashlight thrown from the driveway. Glass rained down on the carpet, and the sudden influx of fresh night air was like a shot of pure oxygen to my dying system. I lunged forward, not for the men, but for the open window. "Mom!" Leo was standing on the roof of Jillian's car, which he had parked directly under my window. He was holding the yellow pawn ticket I had taped to the glass. In the floodlights of the police cruiser, his face was a mask of jagged realization. "I found it! I found the ring!" The transport man grabbed my waist, pulling me back into the dark room. But it was too late. Clara was already in the hallway. I heard her voice, sharp and authoritative, cutting through Harrison's attempts to block her. "Officer, that wardrobe was blocking the door to a sealed room," Clara shouted. "I am a mandatory reporter, and I am telling you, that woman is being held against her will. And check that blue folder. I'm a notary for the city, and I can tell you right now, the signature on that power of attorney is a mathematical impossibility." The men in white suddenly let go of me. They weren't villains. They were contractors who realized they had just walked into a legal landslide. They backed away as the police burst into the room. Harrison was right behind them, his face finally, for the first time in 20 years, showing a structural failure. He looked at me, unwashed, trembling, clutching the bedpost, and then he looked at Leo, who was climbing through the shattered window. "Leo, son, stay back," Harrison stammered. "She's dangerous." Leo didn't even look at his father. He walked straight to me, pulling his jacket off and wrapping it around my shoulders. He smelled of the outside world, of rain and cold air. "I saw the ticket, Mom," he whispered. "Jillian told me you gave it to her as a parting gift. But I know that ring. You told me it would never leave your finger until I was standing at the altar." "The emeralds," I wheezed, pointing toward the hallway. "In a pocket. The ledger." "In the car." Jillian appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her bergamot perfume now cloying and sour. She looked at Harrison, waiting for him to build a bridge over this, to engineer a way out. But Harrison was looking at Clara. Clara held up her tablet. "Mr. Thorne, while you were optimizing your wife's life, you forgot one thing about librarians. We don't just track books. We track intent. I didn't just come for the ledger. I came because Evelyn had been scanning documents into our cloud server for weeks. Insurance policies, loan repayments, and a very specific life estate deed." Harrison's eyes went to the HVAC vent. I smiled, a small, bloody-toothed grin. "The police have the scan of the original deed, Harrison," Clara said. The one that says if you ever attempted to commit Evelyn to a facility without a second opinion from a board-certified physician, not of your choosing, the Thorne engineering firm's assets would immediately revert to the Vance Memorial Library Trust. The silence that followed was absolute. Harrison's entire life was built on supports and loads. He had spent his career making sure things didn't collapse, but he had built his greatest project on the one thing he couldn't control: my mind. "It's a forged trust," Harrison whispered, though even he didn't believe it. "It's a notarized contract, Dad," Leo said, standing up. He looked at his father with a cold, clinical detachment that was a perfect mirror of Harrison's own. "And since you've been liquidating Mom's assets to cover the firm's bankruptcy, which I found out about 10 minutes ago when I checked your office mail, I think we're done talking about structural integrity." The police moved in. They didn't use a gurney. They used handcuffs. As they led Harrison and Jillian out, Jillian sobbing about refreshing the house, Harrison silent and hollowed out. The house finally felt quiet. Not the suffocating quiet of a cage, but the vibrant silence of a library after the last patron has left. Leo helped me to the window. We looked down at the driveway. Clara was standing by her car, clutching her briefcase, her mission accomplished. "Are you okay, Mom?" Leo asked. I looked at the mahogany door, the cedar closet, and the shattered glass on the floor. I looked at the ground beneath us, my ground. "I'm tired, Leo," I said. "But for the first time in 20 years, I can finally hear the clock ticking." I reached into the HVAC vent and pulled out the blue-ribboned deed. I didn't hand it to Leo. I handed it to Clara. "The audit is complete, Clara," I said. She nodded, a small professional smile touching her lips. "I'll file it in the morning, Evelyn, under permanent records." We walked out of the guest wing, past the master suite with its bergamot scent, and down to the foyer. I didn't look back at the walls. I knew they were just wood and nails. The only thing that mattered was the woman walking through them and the son holding her hand. Harrison had spent his life building bridges, but he had forgotten that eventually everyone has to come home. And my home was finally, structurally, mine.